We will introduce ourselves. I'm Jamie Johnson. You've gotten to hear from me earlier today, and you know Christine.
I'm Christine.
So what's interesting about us is we get to work together around a lot of ideas. Christine is the chief marketing officer with Boy the Ball, and I'm the executive director. So this is stuff that's near and dear to our hearts. We are both also builders by our nature, and so we have a lot of experience together in identifying ideas and then trying to figure out whether they're good ideas and then getting into them. So that is exciting. Our hope of this conference, and particularly this session, was just to talk about the way things start. And I think there's a few things that are interesting to you. You may be a founder or the kind of person who will found something, and it's easy to think of that as a business or an organization, but it can also be a Bible study or a book club, or it could be anything, or it could just be an idea within your business. So be careful not to think of it just in terms of being a founder, but it's really the way any idea starts to carry. And so that should serve all of you. We're going to get to 3 key takeaways, and let's say them now. Do you want to read those takeaways?
Yeah, so the first one is every great thing begins with an idea. So everything starts with an idea. Leaders must learn to discern whether an idea is a good one, or one that, sorry, I'm going to bring it closer. Whether it's a good one and what to do with it. So like, is it good, and then what do you do with it? And then third is input, accountability, and resonance are things that leaders need to help. Leaders need help to form other leaders.
Do an idea to action.
To action.
So I would just put this out there first, is if you kind of think about it, typically there is the moment of an idea coming to you. And I would say to you, one real question for you is whether it's important to you that the idea comes from the Lord, or whether you're kind of an entrepreneur who that's not the way you think. I will say to you that this session will be geared towards ideas that come from the Lord. I just have no experience with, nothing I've ever done apart from the Lord has gone anywhere. And I think there's that great verse about, apart from me, you can do nothing. So I think Jesus was winking at us. But I would say to you that we're going to come to you from the perspective that it's a God-given idea. And so the first part, we would say just quickly, we're going to create these 4 squares, and then we're going to go back into it. You don't have to come up here. I'll do the 4 squares. But the first square is hearing something from the Lord, or receiving an idea, or an idea coming to you. It's kind of inception is a way to think of it. I will station Habakkuk. I will station myself on the ramparts, basically, to hear what God's going to say to me. So that's that part. If you're not looking for a new idea, you won't get one. So how do you position yourself to be looking for new ideas? The other question for you is, how do you know you heard right, that it's not just indigestion? Like that's the thing. I used to be a songwriter, and I would never write down a song the first day. If I didn't wake up the next day and I could still remember it, I figured that's got to be garbage. And I'm glad I did that. But for you, what are the processes that you use to confirm that it's the Lord? We have a great book out there called Forgotten Pieces. And one of the chapters talks about learning how to hear and confirm God's voice so that you can obey God's voice. And whatever this process is of learning to discern ideas of, is this the Lord? For me, having a coach is such a big deal. Having a team is a big deal. But what does it take to be in this first square? Anything you'd say about the first square?
I mean, I think the discerning process, it's even that third point, the key takeaway is just like the ability to have input and accountability from people around you. And that's why discipleship is really important. And if you were in one of the earlier sessions yesterday, there was conversations on coach team playing field. Like who are you wrestling with in these processes of ideating?
Yeah, one thought you're going to have is sometimes you might have this idea of, I have this idea, but I'm so scared of whether it's a good idea, so I'm going to stay away from anybody who will rain on my parade. And I'd say, don't do that. If it's a good idea, internal integrity leads to external integration. Like take it, if it'll play in your hometown first, then you can take it to Broadway. But don't avoid your hometown. Like go ahead, let the people close to you who will call you on it call you on it, and enjoy that. Part of the reason that we struggle with faith issues is we're not very convinced of what God has said to us ourselves, and so we're scared of people to touch it. But here's the thing is, if you can't let people wrestle with you to make sure it's the Lord and suffer that, you will not be strong enough when you step out to the next phase, which is to start to invite other people into it. So you really, really want to come out of a situation where you're locked and loaded. Nobody's sure, but you want to be really, really sure that you're supposed to take the next step. This missionary said to us very early around Boy the Ball when we had no money, and I went to a prayer meeting. Most of the time I'd go to prayer meetings hoping someone would give me money. But I went to the prayer meeting, and she was a British missionary, and she said, she looked at me at the end, and she realized what was happening in me, and she said, "Young man, are you in God's will?" And I said, "I hope I am. I think so." And then she said, "Then he'll foot the bill." And what she said, and I thought, I hope that's true too. So can you say that this is a God idea? That's the first part. Next part is you got to turn and share it. And Habakkuk is also instrumental for us. Write the vision down, make it plain on a tablet so the herald can run with it. A lot of times people who have an idea or starting a youth ministry or working a business, you're not very clear with your idea, and so you can't mobilize people. But no matter what you're doing, even if your idea is just to have the best department in a company that has existed for years, but you're going to lead it out of your own personality or giftings, you still have an idea of what to do, and you've got to get clear enough in it that you can share a vision that others will join. There is almost no idea that God will give you that you don't need to invite others to join you in. So learning how to make it plain, learning how to help them come. A lot of times we are complaining about a broken world that just won't listen to Jesus, but they're actually just rejecting how unclear we are and what we're saying. And so a lot of times you're complaining about your business that customers aren't responding, and it's not that clear. I actually think you're watching us struggle in this conference this year that we're a little slow to say everyone should try Love Your City, because we don't want to be prescriptive. But on the other hand, we're saying all these heavy things, but not giving handles of what to do with it. And so I think the workshops help, but there's got to be more. But Christine, you are a person who beats me up, messes with me, cold-cocks me to try to get me to clarity, and tells me everything you just said makes sense to you, but not to anybody else. What would you say about going from the idea to sharing it with others?
That's where resonance comes into play. There's a really great, he's a fundraiser consultant, but he puts out some really great tools. Kevin L. Brown, he's out of South Africa. And one of the things this is true, anyone will tell you these things, but he writes it out really clearly. A really great idea is really easy to digest. Like if you have to just keep beating it into people and keep saying it over and over and over and over and over again, you're not clear enough in your idea. It's too complex. And really, the greatest solutions to these complex problems are really simple ideas. That's actually the power of an idea, is that it's like, aha, I figured it out. And so if it's not like an aha, I figured it out, there's still some working out that needs to happen in the idea. Because part of what happens is when it's too complex, we're almost trying to convince ourselves that it will work. And then when you're starting something, when you're founding something, there's already that self-doubt of just is this really, which is why it's really important to know that this is what the Lord has said, because then it's no, this is what he has said, and so then you can walk in it. But the dwindling down the complexity into the idea is the solution, so the solution should be simple.
Yeah, so that research she's talking about, that is Kevin L. Brown.
Kevin L. Brown.
You can find him on LinkedIn. And
Mighty Ally.
His ad agency is Mighty Ally.
Mighty Ally.
And you can just subscribe or, like him. And the stuff he's putting out right now every single day is just great. I want to be careful to reset the stage here. You could be a parent that is realizing that your children are struggling in an area and you have to get a hold of an idea, and this applies to you. So you could be trying to figure out how to landscape your backyard, and this applies to you as you try to. So don't get too crazy. But then you also could have an idea that a vision God's put in your heart, and this all applies to you. So that's a really, really key thing. There's something else there.
Can I make an example?
Go ahead.
A group that we internally compare ourselves to in regards to how they communicate their idea is Charity Water. And it's because what they tell people is water. It's just water. You give us money, and people will have clean water. They don't tell you that they collect the money, they divide it into these different pots, they subcontract agencies like World Vision and Compassion International that are in country, who then subcontract local employees to build wells and monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of the wells. That's really complex, but the idea is it's just water. What if we could just provide clean water?
And Christine would say to me that I do all the explaining of all of that stuff about everything we do, and people are so bored by the end of it. So that's a good point. I wanted to say this to you. The power of an idea, the thing to think about it is nothing is more powerful than an idea. Once an idea goes beyond one person to start to capture 2 or 3 people, that's the kind of stuff that Dr. King used. You know, he took, as he stood on the steps at Lincoln Memorial, he took this idea of the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution as a check. He said it was a check that was written, that all men are declared, are created equal and have the right, the pursuit of life, liberty, and justice. I should ask Gord, he's Canadian, he could help me remember my own Declaration of Independence and Constitution. But what he said is, the Founding Fathers wrote a promissory note to all of us, and we are here today to cash that check. Like, that was an idea. And that was an idea that just exploded. It was such a great idea. But when you have a great idea like that, and the idea comes to one person, and then it starts to go and share to other people, there is nothing as powerful as that. If it's Wilberforce ending slavery, or if it is Steve Jobs and Wozniak, there's something so powerful. But what I would say to you guys about this is if it's a God idea, you have to be prepared for the fact that you don't own the idea. People will say all the time, oh, well, you're the father of this thing because you started it. I always say, around Boy the Ball, I was the guy that was enough of a loser that I had nothing else going on, so I heard about it first. But if it's a God idea, every single person who arrives in the second stage to the idea, they arrive as a co-founder in a way of what's next. And so you're coming together in collaboration and in corporeity. So that's the second part. So you hear it, you start saying it, you get clear enough that you know the Lord's telling you to say it, you start to get clear enough that you say it the way the Lord's telling you to say it, you write the vision down, you make it plain, and now people start to join. Your people may be customers, your people may be coworkers, your people may be a group of advisors around you, your people may be your children, your people may be your spouse. Boy, that's a tough sell sometimes. I know if I can't get it by Kathy, I'm in trouble, I'm in so much trouble, and it always goes wrong. Every once in a while, me and Christine get something by Kathy, and it always goes wrong. It's just really wrong. So then the next stage is really boots on the ground. Now you're starting to kick into action. And what's so interesting about all 3 of these stages is some of you guys, the moment you have an idea, you're so insecure with it that you shut your ears to listening or learning in these other phases, and that's a mistake. An idea is iterative. It's very much like Lean Startup is a really good book to read. You have this beginning, and you start to get it out before you even know that you've gotten it quite right, but you create a feedback loop where you're creating validated learning that is adjusting and improving and making it better and better. So when you're at this phase and you're hearing from the Lord, He's teaching you and you're making sure that you're hearing from Him. Hopefully you're continuing to hear Him as you're going in and you're starting to talk to people about it. And their problems with your idea are often some of the best gifts that you'll ever have. Your enemies are so instructive. The people that are your biggest critics are so helpful to you because they will say to you what nobody else will say. Everybody else will be like, I think it's great, Jamie. I think it's great. I think, Christine, I think you guys are killing it. But the guy that says to you, I think it's terrible, and I think you stole somebody else's this or that. Good to hear that right here. Good to hear that. And then that next stage where you're starting to get into it, your actual failures, as you heard Jerry White say, are actually feedback. Your failures are feedback. Your failures are learning. In the nonprofit world, we all think that people want a perfect initiative to fund. And you walk out and say, this is so great, would you give money to it? They don't. The really great funders want you to say, I really don't totally know what we're doing. We have this great idea. Would you be involved and fail with us so that we can learn how to get there? And now some of these big dogs, they're on the hunt. So hearing it, sharing it, boots on the ground, thoughts?
I mean, I have some. I don't know that they're incredibly helpful, other than like there's a little bit of the failure part where it's like, I could say for us, we know that our idea is young people. And so then as we're doing our strategic planning and like looking at things year after year, there's different like ways, like it's, the end is how do we reach as many young people and mobilize them around the world. The means and how we do that sometimes will change. Like one thing that hasn't changed is Love Your City, which is why we're in the Love Your City conference. But there have been different programs that have spouted out and flamed out, and it's not that they were bad, it just wasn't, we learned something and we learned another way. And so the actual original idea is what we're after, but then along the way, how you get there, being willing to pivot and like take the failure as a feedback loop of like, okay, so we're still heading in the right direction, but like maybe not in the as quickly or as effectively as we're originally trying to go.
Yeah, I'll give you a practical example. Barry Lusk is sitting over there, and Barry is doing a really good job with, it's Ironworks, am I right? That's right. He's doing a really good job at gathering cohorts of owner-operators, business leaders. Well, we're realizing within Love Your City that churches have to be involved. Churches being involved is a critical piece, both for our teams, and because so many people are meeting Jesus, there has to be a place to go. So we've been working on churches for years, all of us, our whole lives, really. But now the next thing we're realizing is marketplace leaders are critically important, businesses being involved, because people need jobs, but also because we've seen, like with Intel, Western Union, we've seen businesses get involved and it be transformative. So how do you weave that in a city? And how do you get connected to marketplace leaders? So we've been working on a new program called Pipeline, where we are doing that, and it's really working. But one of our next questions is, should we launch a cohort for business leaders? So we're kind of at that moment of, do we do this? Well, Barry is probably one of the best in the city at doing that kind of stuff. So Joey and Barry are good friends, and Joey's been a part of Ironworks, but we ended up in a meeting just a little while ago with the guys from Ethiopia, and we were talking just in general about all these things. But then I thought about it. I was actually driving Segab to his graduation to get his doctorate, and Barry called me, and we were talking about, I just put out there, would you be willing to do a session at the conference with me on these things as part of getting to know each other, to figure out whether either we support you in launching a cohort, or whether we learn from you how to launch a cohort, or whether we can work together well. So we did it, and we didn't spend a heck of a lot of time together, but we did it, and we just were in there together, and it was very fun. It was beautiful. He actually ended with a story today that was gorgeous. Well, then we said we have a plan for meeting in a week to talk about how it went, and then we have some follow-up steps as well. It's such a great example of just, I know the Lord has said for us to do this, but we really don't quite exactly know what we're doing. So how can we be involved in learning and putting ourselves next to people as we get to boots on the ground? Yeah. Next piece, final piece, is growing it. I think this one's kind of the hardest part in a way, because in a really dynamic way, growing it is all of this over and over again, every direction. How do you start into a new community for us? How do you start into marketplace leaders? How do you figure out how to care for donors for us? For you guys, there's still so many aspects. The thing I realized as a parent is that I have a really great idea for my kids, but every great idea, every change creates a bunch of new circumstances that now you have to stand in, that you need to hear the Lord about. So I will stand again just for the point of, and those are the 4 points. So you're hearing the Lord and starting, you're sharing, you're sharing it and gathering people. Then you're boots on the ground getting started, and then you're growing it. Before I keep going with it, any thoughts about the last one of actually the growing of it?
I mean, in the growing of it, then there's a little bit of you're going back, putting it on the tablet, making it plain. Because then if you're growing it, you figured something out, like it's working. So then how do you then share that it's working? So you kind of go back to then to sharing it with people, and then it starts to resonate, and then you invite people into it again, so you're going back out with more people. And so then it's, otherwise then you end up just you and you're kind of really far into something versus the, okay, no, we figured something out, so then how do you regroup and then you regrow.
Yeah, the final challenge, and then let's open it up for some dialogue, is just think big about these things. Think really big about these things. Like, go for it. Go for big things. Go for dangerous things. But then think really small about these things. Like, you know you need to change your diet. Like, the same process works, you know. You know you're working on a better relationship with your son or your dad. And the same process is involved in that. How do you hear the Lord? How do you step into these things? So what I will say is that if you're faithful in little, then you learn these processes around hearing the Lord towards the big. I would also say that there's some parts of the process that if you're doing something very big, you'll get false readings. And that's why it's so important to have people involved. So just because you're selling a product that nobody's responding to doesn't actually mean it's wrong yet. And so how do you know whether you're just crazy or you should keep going? I find myself in that world all of the time. Sunday was there for some of those early days. So that's really interesting. Like, you can't hear the Lord through circumstance all the time. So how do you go deep into all of these things? But I would just say to you, just please think about this as far as every part of your life. And again, it's so important hearing God's voice and then having a coach, somebody in your life who's a little further ahead to help you, and then having a team. So I'm going to open it to questions, or is there something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I have a couple things. One, I want to make an example of what I said a second ago.
Sure.
So Pete, my husband, and I, we just started a school, and we just completed our first school year. And there was a little bit of just like, it's the first year. We're doing a lot of learning. He's been teaching for almost 20 years, so there's some like, he knows how to do school things, but like we've never run our own school. He's been an assistant principal, but never been the head of school. He's never recruited students in this way. Like, we've not had to fundraise for, it's a lot of the stuff that I've done for Boy the Ball and a lot of stuff he's done in schools, but it's not stuff we've done together, and it's not stuff that's been done in its current capacity. And so then there was a goal to just like, we don't want 100 students here. This year you probably want like 20. So there was like a fight for that first 20 students. But there was a lot of learning that happened this year, like picking the curriculum and the types of students, like to have, if we're really focusing on diversity and language learning, then how do you have the right mix of each kind of people group and all of that stuff. But now we've learned a lot. And so then we can continue with those same 20 students, or we can add another 20. So that kind of, you go back to almost where we were last August, where it's like, okay, we're interviewing teachers and we're interviewing more families, and you're going back a little bit to the beginning, but it's with a lot of learned information of what worked this year to then grow for next year. Just like a practical example. The other thing I was going to say, to tie in even some of what Tyler was saying earlier this morning, there's an idea, there's something in us, I think, that feels like, well, if I don't have an idea, like, I don't know, but there's these things that you're passionate about, or like just like in your life, like to your point, Jamie, like you're a parent. If you're a parent, like there's ways. Like today, very micro situation. I've been working all week. I have 2 small children. My daughter was feeling it at lunchtime, and I had to do something, and she was like, "But Mom, I just want to see you." So it was like, well, I have all these things to do, and you need to go eat lunch. But it was like, or is there a way that these work together? And so then, like, ideas are really, really powerful, and it changes circumstance. Like, we could be led by circumstance. Like, life is really hard. There's culture is really hard. Church is really hard. Our jobs are really hard. Or is there a way that we could not be led by circumstance, but be led by Him into things changing? And that is an idea. Those are like micro innovations that change circumstance. And you transcend circumstance, and you're in kingdom places. And so then whether it's parenting teenagers or small children or running a business, or figuring out how does your business engage its neighborhood, or how do you get your congregation to go and be effective in youth ministry or outside the walls, you can be led by what's really, really hard and then be stuck in the micro places, or you can go into the macro places where it's like, well, what's another way? And you'll find Him in those places.